I was sprawled on the wooden bench in our Colorado home sauna, steam curling around me, my towel slipping off one shoulder, when the door creaked open and my stepdad Reed, a 55-year-old ex-yoga coach who now massaged clients at a fancy spa, stepped in, shirtless in just shorts, his skin already glistening, clearly thinking the room was empty after I'd said I'd head out for the night. I froze for a second, the heat pressing against my chest, then smirked, saying he'd caught me slacking, but a masser like him could probably fix my tension, my voice light, teasing, to see if he'd bolt or play along with the game I hadn't planned until he stood there. He stopped short, muttering my name with a curse, his eyes flicking to the towel before meeting mine, saying he'd leave if I wanted, but I shifted closer, letting the bench creak, telling him not to chicken out, that he'd taught relaxation for years, so he owed me a demo. My grin daring him to bite. He hesitated, then sat beside me, closer than he needed to, the sauna's haze blurring the space between us, and said I'd have to ask nicer if I wanted his skills, his tone rough but playful, like he was testing me back, his arm brushing the bench near my leg. I leaned forward, saying I'd bet he'd worked tighter knots than mine, but he'd have to prove it, my shoulder grazing his as I adjusted my towel, deliberate, watching his jaw twitch, the steam making everything feel heavier, like we'd stepped into something we couldn't walk out of easy. He chuckled, low, saying I was pushing it, but his hand lifted, hovering near my elbow, and I tilted my head, asking if he was scared I'd ask for too much, my words sharp, meant to tug at the guy I'd seen loosen up over coffee runs he'd made for me when Mom was too busy selling houses. I turned, offering my back, saying he could start there, keep it professional, and he exhaled, his fingers landing light on my shoulders, kneading slow, careful, but firm enough I felt the heat of his hands through the damp air, sending a spark I didn't expect down my spine. I teased him, saying he wasn't half bad, but I'd bet he'd gone softer since his yoga days, my voice dropping, daring him to push harder, and he pressed deeper, his thumbs tracing my neck, saying I'd be surprised what he could still handle, his breath closer now, tickling my ear, making my pulse jump like the sauna wasn't the only thing burning. I twisted, catching his wrist, saying he'd better not get cocky, my fingers tight, lingering, and he held my gaze, his hand still under mine, squeezing back just long enough I knew he felt it too, the air humming like a wire pulled taut. A pipe hissed loud in the corner, steam bursting out, snapping us both back, and I laughed, saying he'd nearly had me relax till that ruined it, letting go of his wrist, my foot brushing his as I shifted, keeping the spark alive. He stood, saying we'd overdone it in here, his voice thicker, like he was shaking off something, and I leaned back, saying he'd owe me a better session next time, my towel slipping an inch, deliberate, watching his eyes flicker before he grabbed the door. Mom was out showing a property, her texts all about open houses, clueless we'd been locked in this haze, and I stayed on the bench as he left, the sauna still warm, but not as warm as the look he'd left behind, one I knew I'd chase again even if I shouldn't. A couple of days after the sauna left me buzzing, I was itching to get out of our Colorado house, where Mom's real estate calls droned through every wall, when Reed knocked on my door at dawn, saying he was hiking a nearby trail to clear his head and dared me to keep up, his eyes glinting like they had when I'd teased him in the steam. I yanked on boots, saying he'd regret challenging me, figuring I could push him again, see if that spark would flare without Mom's open house schedules boxing us in, and followed him to his truck, the morning air sharp, promising a quiet no one else could touch. He drove us to a pine-lined path, saying it'd test my grit, and I shot back that he'd be the one eating dust, my grin sharp, meant to rile him, already feeling the pull from how his hands had felt on me before. The trail climbed fast, gravel crunching underfoot, the sun painting the trees gold, and I jogged ahead, calling over my shoulder that his yoga days hadn't made him quick, my hair bouncing as I dodged a root, knowing he'd chase. He laughed, catching up, saying I'd trip if I kept mouthing off, and I spun, sticking out my tongue, only to stumble on a rock, my arms flailing until he grabbed me, his hands clamping my hips, pulling me against him to stop the fall, his chest hard, breath fast, like he'd run more than a few steps. I twisted in his grip, saying he'd planned that just to play hero, my hands pushing his shoulders, light but slow, teasing, and he held on, saying I'd need more than sass to outrun him, his fingers tight, lingering, sending heat through me sharper than the mountain chill. I broke free, sprinting down the path, yelling for him to catch me if he could, my boots slipping on pine needles as I darted toward a stream, the rush of water loud, and he tore after me, his steps heavy, closing fast until he caught my waist, spinning me around. Both of us laughing, out of breath, my back against a tree, his hands still on me, warm, too close for just a game. I tilted my chin, saying he wasn't half bad for an old guy, my fingers brushing his arm, daring him to hold tighter, and he leaned in, saying I'd better watch who I called old, his voice low, rough, like he was fighting something, his grip sliding to my sides, making my pulse hammer, the forest quiet except for our guests and the creek's hum. I pushed him back, saying he'd have to try harder to keep me pinned, and ran again, my heart pounding, but I slowed by the stream, letting him catch up, my hip bumping his as I bent to splash water, saying he looked like he needed cooling off, my grin wicked, meant to spark. He splashed back, his hand grazing my wrist, and I grabbed his fingers, tugging him closer, saying he'd lose this fight too, my eyes locked on his, the air crackling until a hiker's whistle pierced the silence, sharp, from up the trail, some early riser with a dog, breaking the spell. He let go, stepping back, saying we'd gone far enough, his voice tighter, like he'd remembered Mom's rules, her deals keeping her out late while we played out here. We hiked down, quieter now, and I nudged him, saying he'd better plan a tougher trail next time, my hand brushing his elbow, quick, to keep the heat alive, and he smirked, saying I'd beg for mercy first, but his glance lingered, heavy, like he knew we'd crossed something. Mom's car was gone when we got home, her voicemail about a client meeting buzzing on my phone, and I watched Reed head inside, his shoulders tense, feeling the trail's chase still burning, knowing I'd pull him back out, no matter what he told himself. A week after our trail chase left my skin buzzing, I was bored with Mom's endless realtor calls filling the Colorado house, so I tagged along when Reed said he was meeting a spa client at a local coffee shop, claiming I'd keep him company. Though really I wanted to see if I could rattle him again like I had in the Pines. He didn't argue, just tossed me his truck keys, saying I'd better not slow him down, and I teased him as we drove, saying his client probably booked him for that yoga charm, my elbow nudging his arm, quick, to spark the grin I'd caught before, and he shot back that I'd be the one charming trouble if I kept talking, his eyes glinting, pulling me right back to that streamside tussle. The coffee shop was packed, smelling of roasted beans and sugar, chatter bouncing off brick walls while a barista steamed milk behind a crowded counter, and Reed found a spot near the window, waving at a woman in a blazer before turning to me, saying I could order if I stayed out of his deal. I leaned against the counter, scanning the menu, then glanced at him, saying he looked too smooth for this hipster crowd, like he'd charm anyone but me, my voice light, daring, and he stepped closer, saying I'd be surprised who he could handle, his shoulder brushing mine, deliberate, sending a jolt that made the room feel smaller, like it was just us and the hiss of the espresso machine. I ordered a latte, then pointed at his black coffee, saying it suited him, all serious until I stirred it up, and when it came, I swiped a sip, licking the foam slow, saying he'd have to fight me for it, my eyes locked on his, teasing, watching his jaw tighten like I'd hit a nerve. He reached over, grabbing my wrist to pull the cup back, his fingers firm, sliding along my skin, and said I was playing dirty, his voice low, rough, close enough I felt his breath, making my pulse skip as I twisted my hand, not breaking free, saying he'd taught me dirty tricks, didn't he, my grin sharp, meant to keep him hooked. He held on, his thumb pressing my pulse point, and I leaned in, saying he'd lose this round if he didn't let go, my words soft, heavy, the counter's edge digging into my hip as the line behind us shuffled. The barista cleared his throat, loud, his eyes flicking between us like he'd caught a show he wasn't paid for, and Reed dropped my wrist, stepping back to grab his coffee, muttering we'd better sit before I started a scene, but his glance lingered, dark, like he wasn't ready to let it go. I followed, sliding into a chair across from his client, saying I'd behave if he shared his secrets, my foot nudging his under the table, quick, playful, and he kicked back, light, saying I'd never keep up with his secrets, his tone teasing but edged, like he meant more than the deal he was pitching. The client droned about massage packages, oblivious, and I twirled my straw, asking Reed if he'd ever charmed a tough crowd like me, my voice low, meant for him, and he leaned forward, saying I was tougher than most, his fingers tapping the table near mine, close enough to spark without touching. His client left, and we stayed, the shop quieter now, and I leaned across, saying he'd owe me a better outing than this, my hand brushing his sleeve, slow, to pull him back, and he said I'd have to earn it, his eyes holding mine, heavy, like we'd left the trail for something tighter. A text buzzed asking about a house showing, clueless we were here, and Reed checked his phone, saying we should head out before she got nosy, but I stood close as we left, saying he couldn't hide from me forever, my shoulder grazing his. Feeling his tension follow me to the truck, the night air sharp, promising more than either of us was saying. A month after the coffee shop left us both wired, I was dodging Mom's realtor chatter about square footage one chilly Colorado evening when Reed caught me in the kitchen, saying he was stopping by his old yoga studio to pick up some gear and asked if I'd come along, claiming I'd get a kick out of seeing where he used to run classes before he traded mats for massage tables. I smirked, saying he just wanted to show off, but I grabbed a jacket, teasing that I'd outstretch him any day, my voice light to pull at the spark we'd left simmering, and followed him to his truck, knowing Mom was too buried in client emails to notice us slip out into the dusk, the mountains looming dark beyond our street. The studio was a quiet loft above a bookstore, smelling of polished wood and faint incense, its wide windows catching the last of the sunset as Reed unlocked the door, saying he'd sold the place years ago but still had a key for old time's sake. I kicked off my shoes, stepping onto a mat, saying it looked too calm for a guy like him, and I bet he'd taught more than breathing to his students, my grin sharp, meant to poke, and he laughed, saying I'd never handle his old routines, his arm brushing mine as he set a box of straps aside, sending a shiver I didn't hide. I dropped into a sloppy downward dog, wiggling my hips, saying he'd better fix me before I broke something, and he stepped behind, his hands landing on my ribs, light, guiding, saying I'd need more than sass to get it right, his voice low, warm, like he was playing my game now. I pushed up, turning to face him, saying he was too close for a teacher, wasn't he, my shoulder grazing his chest, deliberate, and he didn't back off, his hands sliding to my waist, slow, to adjust my stance, saying I'd asked for it, hadn't I? His fingers firm, lingering, making my breath catch as the room's silence pressed in, just us and the creak of the floor. I twisted, saying I'd bet he'd bent rules back then, maybe even now, my voice soft, daring, and stepped into a wobbly warrior pose, letting my hand brush his arm, teasing that he'd have to catch me if I fell, and he held my wrist, pulling me steady, saying I was the one bending things, his eyes dark, locked on mine, like we'd left the mats for something riskier. I sank to the mat, saying he should show me a real move, and he knelt beside me, guiding my legs into a stretch, his hands on my thighs, careful but heavy, and I leaned back, saying he wasn't playing fair, my fingers grazing his knee, pushing to see how far he'd go, the air thick with something we weren't naming. He said I'd lose it fair, his voice rough, his thumb pressing my hip, and I tilted closer, saying losing sounded fun with him, my words sharp, meant to burn, until a car alarm blared outside, shrill through the open window, jerking us apart, his hands dropping as he stood, saying we'd gotten carried away, his jaw tight, like he'd remembered Mom's world waiting back home. We packed his gear, quieter now, and I nudged him, saying he'd owe me a private lesson to make up for chickening out, my hand tapping his back, quick, flirty, to keep the heat alive, and he smirked, saying I'd regret asking, but his glance lingered, heavy, like he wasn't sure he'd regret it. Mom's voicemail pinged as we drove back, some deal closing late, oblivious to us, and I leaned against the truck door, saying he'd better not hide this place from me again, my eyes catching his, feeling the studio's pull follow us, knowing I'd drag him back to it, rules or not. By summer, I was climbing the walls in our Colorado house, with Mom's realtor pitches drowning out any chance of quiet, when Reed called me one sunny afternoon, saying he was scouting a lakeside cabin for a new spa retreat and wanted my take, claiming I had a better eye for vibe than his boss, though I knew he just wanted me along for the ride. I grabbed a swimsuit, teasing over the phone that he'd better not bore me with work talk, my voice light to tug at the heat we'd left in that yoga studio, and drove to meet him, leaving Mom haggling with a client on speakerphone, oblivious we'd be hours away, the mountains promising a space where her rules couldn't reach. The cabin sat on a quiet lake, water glittering under pines, and Reed was waiting by the dock, shorts and a loose shirt making him look younger than the guy who massaged stressed execs, and I jogged over, saying he'd picked a spot too pretty for his usual zen nonsense, my hip bumping his as I dropped my bag. He laughed, saying I'd change my tune once I saw the view, and led me to the shore, where we kicked off shoes, tossing stones into the waves, and I splashed him, saying he'd better fight back or I'd win this one, my grin sharp, daring him to play. He growled, grabbing my waist, hoisting me over his shoulder like I weighed nothing, and I squealed, pounding his back, saying he'd pay for that, my hands gripping his shoulders, feeling his muscles shift, the game turning hotter than the sun overhead. He spun me down, dropping me onto the grass, and I pulled him with me, rolling until he pinned me, his hands on my arms, laughing as I squirmed, saying I'd never surrender, my legs tangling with his, my voice breathless, teasing that he'd have to try harder to keep me down. He leaned closer, his breath warm, saying I was asking for trouble, his fingers sliding to my hips, light but firm, sending a spark that made my chest tight, and I arched up, saying trouble was my favorite lesson, my hands brushing his sides, slow, deliberate, watching his eyes darken, like we'd left the lake for somewhere wilder. I shoved him off, scrambling up, and splashed into the shallows, calling him a coward if he didn't follow, my swimsuit clinging as I turned, saying he'd lose points for chickening out, my words sharp, meant to pull him in. He waited after me, catching my arm, spinning me to face him, water dripping down his chest, and said I played too rough for my own good, his hand grazing my thigh, lingering, making my pulse race as I stepped closer, saying rough was just how I liked it. My voice low, daring, the lake lapping around us, quiet except for our breaths. I flicked water at his face, laughing when he flinched, and grabbed his wrist, saying he'd have to catch me again to win, my fingers tight, teasing, until a neighbor's shout, some guy across the shore yelling to keep it down, cut through, sharp, jerking us apart. His hand dropping as he glanced over, muttering we'd gotten loud, his voice tight, like he'd remembered Mom's world wasn't as far as it felt. We climbed out, drying off, and I sat on the dock, saying he'd picked a hell of a spot to lose at, my foot nudging his leg, quick, flirty, to keep the buzz alive, and he smirked, saying I'd lost worse, his eyes catching mine, heavy, like he wasn't talking about the water. Mom's text pinged later, another deal closed, no questions about us, and I leaned against him, saying he'd better bring me back here, my hand brushing his, feeling his tension as we packed up, the cabin fading behind us, but not the pull that kept dragging us closer, no matter who was watching. 6 months after the sauna sparked something I couldn't shake, Mom was supposedly at a realtor conference in Denver, leaving our Colorado house too quiet, when I found Reed in her bedroom one sticky July evening, sweating through a faded tee as he wrestled with a loose bed frame bolt, muttering about fixing it before she got back. I'd been dodging his usual check-ins since the lake, unsure how far we'd pushed, but I stepped in, saying he looked like he'd break it before he fixed it, my voice light to test the air, tossing my phone on the dresser, teasing that a yogi like him should be better with his hands, my eyes catching his to pull at the heat we'd left by the water. He smirked, saying I'd better help or quit mouthing off, and I grabbed a wrench, leaning close, saying I'd show him up, my shoulder brushing his, deliberate, feeling the room shrink, like the cabin had, only tighter now. I handed him a screw, my fingers grazing his palm, slow, and he took it, saying I was too close to be useful, but he didn't move away, his hands tightening the bolt as I perched on the bed's edge, asking why he bothered with Mom's chores when he'd rather be anywhere else, my voice soft, digging at the guy I'd seen wrestle me down. He knelt, leveling with me, saying some things you do to keep the peace, but his eyes flicked to mine, dark, like peace wasn't what he wanted, and I nudged his arm, saying he'd never been peaceful with me, my grin sharp, meant to spark. The mattress creaking when I shifted closer, the air thick with her perfume and something heavier we weren't naming. I tugged at the wrench, saying I'd try, and he grabbed it back, laughing, pulling me forward until I stumbled, landing across his lap, my hands on his chest, and I shoved, saying he'd cheated, my hips pinning him as we wrestled, his hands catching my wrists. His laugh rough, saying I'd started it, his fingers sliding to my sides, firm, sparking heat that made my breath hitch. I leaned down, hair falling over his face, saying he'd lose this round, my voice low, daring, my thighs tight against him, his hands gripping my hips, slow, heavy, like he'd stopped fighting it, his eyes burning, inches from mine, the bed frame rattling as we shifted, every move winding us closer to a line we'd circled too long. I whispered he wasn't playing fair, my chest brushing his, and he exhaled hard, saying I'd pushed him too far, his voice raw, his thumbs pressing my hips, the room humming like it'd collapse if we moved wrong. I tilted closer, our breaths mixing, my fingers curling into his shirt, and he held me there, his grip tightening, like we'd tip over any second, the tension screaming until the front door slammed downstairs, Mom's voice ripping through, yelling my name, furious, her heels storming up as Reed shoved me off, his face pale, and she burst in, her conference bag crashing to the floor, screaming what the hell we were doing on her bed, her eyes wild, darting between us. I scrambled up, saying it was just a joke, we were fixing the frame, but she cut me off, shrieking that she'd seen me cling to him for months, her voice breaking, and turned on Reed, yelling he'd fallen back to his old ways, her words slicing, hinting at secrets I didn't know, her hands shaking as she threw a pillow at him, calling him a liar. I grabbed my phone, bolting past her, her screams chasing me down the hall, saying I'd ruined everything, and Reed's voice, hoarse, pleading her name, faded as I hit the stairs, my chest tight, knowing she'd never buy it was nothing, not after catching us like that. The house felt like it had cracked open, Mom's rage spilling out, and I didn't look back, the bed frame's rattle echoing in my head, burning hotter than anything we'd done.